In half a mile, exit left.
Alexa, turn on the lights.
You have reached your destination.
Engineer by training, a pilot by hobby, and a Manchester United sports fan by birth, our next speaker has previously served as a senior marketing executive and CMO in the cybersecurity industry for over 15 years. He now manages all branding, operational, and strategic marketing for Check Point. Please welcome the avid skier and our Chief Marketing Officer, Peter Alexander.
Good morning. I don't know why they told you all that stuff again. How are we doing? Everyone have a good time last night? Yeah? Is that a yes? Is that a yes, but I'm too hungover to make any noise? Maybe. Great. Well, it was good to see so many of you out there dancing as well last night. I had some fun with it. And hopefully we can continue into the day and go through a lot more innovations in cybersecurity. I had one question, I'll come back to it later. We are going to go through a fairly active morning, and we've got a lot of content. We hope you will stay with us. We've got all of the check facilities out there for bags and coats if people need to check out of their hotels, that kind of thing. So let's make sure that we're in the sessions if at all possible, and we can leave our bags outside. Is Oliver Bounton Thomas in the room? Ollie, are you out there? Somebody say yes. There he is. Let's turn the lights up for a second. Can we turn the lights up? I want to introduce Oliver Bounton Thomas. He's standing there. Ollie was qualified for Check Point at 15. He's the youngest member in the room here, 16 years old. Oliver Bounton Thomas, everyone. We are breeding them young. Great. Well, without further ado, let's get things started. Thank you.
In 1996, as a young technical account manager, our next speaker was asked to deliver 3 floppy disks, only to learn upon his return that he had just delivered something of huge value.
If you want to hear more, track him down in the hallway and ask.
He joined Check Point in Y2K when our new local office was built.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the head of Security Solutions Engineering in Europe, Peter SandKujil.
How about that? Good morning, Vienna. They finally got my name right. It's a really difficult one if you look at how it's spelled. It's in Dutch, a U and an I means ui, and an I and a J means A, and then you try and pronounce all of that in one sentence, it becomes SandKujil. It's really not hard. I don't get why they never managed to really pronounce it properly. Thank you for our Belgian marketing lady who actually coached the people to get this done. I'm here today to talk to you about our adventures that we've done in the cloud. About 3 years ago, I had one of the guys, a very talented guy in my team. His name is Driehuis. He's from Spain, so he's got a difficult to pronounce last name as well. And I asked him, said, look, can you look after this cloud thingy? Because I think it might be something that we'll be looking at a lot more going forward in future. And what I asked him to do is to do what people in my team do. They become a subject matter expert, and they start struggling with the same question that many of our customers have been struggling with. So what is this cloud thing? It's very different to very different people. One of the questions I always ask an audience is, what name pops in your head when you think cloud? What do you think many people answer me? First row, I can actually hear you if you talk back. Amazon, right? So people think cloud is public cloud. It's not necessarily the case. Cloud is a really cool technology. It's based on something that's called software-defined networking. And for all the techies in the room, we've been doing Ethernet and IP routing for 25 years. And all of a sudden it's different. You get to be allowed to put your mindset in a way that new architectures that you never thought of have become possible. You can break barriers in organizations that have always been there, and you've basically been starting to take them for granted. So with that, it opens a new era. And when I talk to customers, I sometimes get a bit disappointed because I ask them, hey, what is the cloud to you? And they will give me an answer. You know, for me, the cloud really is somebody else's computer. I don't have to care anymore. I don't have to buy equipment. I don't have to power it up. And it's always going to be there. So I'm saving cost. It's as simple as that. I don't have to invest anything other than my compute, my usage, and somebody else takes care of the whole thing. If this is your mindset going to the cloud, you should probably have attended my session yesterday, because that's a lift and shift approach, and you really didn't embrace the beauty that cloud has to offer. You didn't embrace the fact that it's not just about hiring compute. You didn't embrace the fact that you can actually start building a way to deliver whatever business that you deliver as you may have been doing today. We then start asking ourselves questions, because I obviously asked my sales folk, hey, how are we doing? Are we seeing cloud projects in your big accounts? You're doing your big refresh, you're introducing new technology. What's up with that? And like, oh no, nothing really much is alive. They're looking a bit at Amazon, or Microsoft visited them and give them a discount if they start using Azure, so they're playing around with that. And I challenge them. I say, so who are you talking to? Who makes the call on doing this? Because I make them a promise. I tell them, look, if you take me with to go to that very account, I promise you 100% they are using cloud, or they have a plan to do stuff in the cloud. They're going to introduce cloud technology, or they're going to be running something in the cloud. You just don't know. You haven't been looking outside of your comfort zone, the little box that says, this is what I do every day. And the same thing is going to be true when we look at it from a security perspective. So depending on what side you swing, I think my manager would prefer me to say Voltaire. Some of the Americans in the room might like Spider-Man, but the same thing applies. With great agility comes great responsibility. So we all want to be agile. We want to be on the top of our feet. We want to be able to respond to whatever comes our way, right when it happens, right at the right time when it happens, and we can use the compute and the associated cost at the time when it's really applicable. It means we'll also be exposed to new vectors that we've never thought of, which is the challenging part if we think about the cloud as just somebody else's computer. This is a quote from the Microsoft team, who indicated that they saw a 300% increase in the theft of user identity. Now think about this. If you just lifted and shifted your whole data center into a public cloud, you just shut the door, you shut down the power, everything is in the cloud, I'm a happy man because it's always going to be available. And somebody takes your credentials. Is that still your data center? Or maybe somebody else just acquired your whole data center just like that. That is a completely new attack factor people don't necessarily start to think about. But it's definitely something we cannot justify to ourselves to say, it's somebody else's computer, so I don't have to care. In reality, you should be caring even more than you've ever been caring in the past. Here's a graph that's called the game of survivor. So SANS Institute records the average lifetime of a Windows computer that is connected to the internet. And as you can see, the time varies. The time goes from an hour up to a few minutes, and at the moment, the current time is about 60 minutes. So you get 60 minutes to take a Windows computer that's not patched, connected to the internet from your brick and mortar environment. Remember that, because this is your data center or network, wherever you may be. And at that point, you lose control over the computer on average. So with that, if we start taking that stuff to the cloud, we figured, how much time would that involve? Is there any metrics that tell us where the risk appetite should be? Are we at more risk? Are we at less risk? We really don't know. So we wanted to figure out, and we figured, how can we measure threat in the cloud? Because obviously, Check Point is a security company. We want to talk about how we can protect your business. And part of protecting business is to look at threats that may be coming our way. We got a super ninja team, headed by Oded Vanunu, here as well. If you want to talk about thinking freaky and thinking outside of the box, he's definitely the guy to talk to. And they've been showing that to us with various publications that explain how thoughtless implementation of a functionality can lead finally to something that will lead to other results, because that's quite often what happens. You start thinking about how things should work, and effectively somebody else has a different angle. So there's lots of tools out there. There's a few interesting ones here. One of them is an ICS Cronpot. We all realize that OT networks should not be connected to IT networks, right? We have this little tool that we have in our portfolio that shows customers on a frequent basis that the reality is different. And all of these will do what a honeypot will do. Let's set something up and let's see what happens. Let's see how people will approach us, how they will attempt to get their way into where we are. For me, personally, a very interesting one is the e-mobility. E-mobility allows you to emulate that you're being a car on the internet or a collection of cars, right? Jerry yesterday told us that his decision-making element of buying a car is the amount of connectivity that he can apply inside of his car. I think I should have a conversation with him and see how he did his justification of that versus the risk appetite that he may be running when driving his car, because we always talk when he's driving. So in that, a lot of information came in, and we learned a lot of things. In 15 minutes, we had more than 100 events that were going on. Now you might think, an event, I don't care so much. An event could be a port scan, and a port scan, if you scan all ports, that will be a lot of events. That's not what we included. We tried to include the reality of how people are approaching any machine that is erected in the cloud. So any machine that comes up, and you can see here, we did the math, and in 5 minutes, we had attacks brute forcing the SSH account. We had attacks doing a malware delivery. We had attacks trying to find very specific exploits in the service that we launched. So these are capable to be done because the IP subnets belonging to the cloud are very well documented. And the beauty of automation, as we've been showing you throughout this convention, also means that the guys who are trying to attack you can use the very same technology. Nobody goes and scans your cloud instance. They really don't, and they don't care. They only care once they find what's inside. But at that point, you have been exposed to a challenge right there. So we then started thinking, that's okay. We've been talking to you for the last 25 years. We started building very nice architectures. We have been on a journey together to go from access control and firewalling to introduce IPS, to go to full-fledged threat prevention technologies, including threat emulation. So we're cool, because you realize that that cloud thingy is an extension to your network, and those technologies really apply to that part of the network. So we tried to figure out, and we asked a bunch of people, said, hey, who's responsible for security when you go cloud? And I know, it gets dull when we talk to you about the shared responsibility model, but apparently we need to keep hammering this fact, because there's people out there making decisions on running compute, and compute includes your data, your business value, and they make decisions thinking, I'm sure Microsoft said it's going to be secure, or Amazon said it's going to be secure, so it must be secure, right? There's no trademark or quality rubber stamp that says this is more secure than secure. So when they say secure, I should be okay. We feel a little bit different. These are also scary people. They said, let's get it up and running, and then we'll do it in the future. Right, as if that's going to happen. If the budget's gone, the project has passed, we're off to new pastures, so nothing like that is going to come in. Then we figured, how can we talk to people and find out how to change this? So one of the things we asked people is, who is doing the security design? And 64% of C-suite people said, I do believe that my security teams are involved, and they're talking about this. And at the team level, 39% said, yes, we're involved. But is that just something that we observe? I got a question for you. How many of you invited your DevOps people to come here to this security convention? And why am I asking the question? Because they currently hold the pot of gold. They are making the decisions to go into cloud. They decide what to deploy in the cloud. If you don't get them involved, if you don't get these people at the table, they're just going to do whatever they feel like doing. And they were not educated for 25 years like we have been on designing secure compute environments. They will make work what needs working, and they will see if they think it's somebody else's computer, it's not my problem, right? Because the cloud takes care of me. An interesting topic that I wanted to highlight is something that's called mindless data sharing. Until about 2 or 3 months ago, Amazon in any storage bucket said, well, it's got to be connected. People store this data in order to be used, so effectively it can communicate to the outside world. That means any bucket anybody ever created, if they didn't change the defaults, is open to the internet and can communicate with whomever who wants to connect to this. This has changed, so that's a good thing, right? In the change, you can still expose the data, because sometimes it's not just you handling the data. You're working with third-party suppliers. They work with you. They come and they try and figure out, how can we do this little piece of compute for you, and we'll provide you with the output. So think about a website running adverts. The adverts are going to be delivered by a third party. What if the third party didn't secure their environment well enough, and they are opening up the back door right into your data? How do you get any level of control of that? These are new challenges that we see today that we didn't have to think of that much when we were able to put everything inside our data center, because, hey, we were in full control. Up to today, there's 40,000 exposed data buckets right there. And you don't have to worry about finding them yourself. Just like in the ICS world, on the internet, there are search engines that will give you a nice and filtered view. So all the GIFs and all of that stuff has been filtered out. These are PDFs, Excels, these are customer data. So you can choose what you want to do with that. Leverage to be competitive, or drop a Trojan and try and get some ransomware going, or find a nice distribution site. Then you might think that if Amazon said, let's close this down, people figured it out and they were doing the right things. This is from the 25th of January. 24 million loan records leaked on an open bucket. You're thinking at some point, somebody should get their proverbial behind kicked, right? Pay attention. These are crown jewels. This is what makes a company tick. This is not something you can think of lightly. So what we feel is that where people say, trust me, it's secure, they're great tools. Security Hub, all of those technologies, they will give you an insight that's a definite start, because in the cloud things are not very clear. But we didn't start doing this 25 years ago because everybody can do this. So think about where your risk appetite lies, what you're actually doing in that cloud environment. In summary, I just want to leave you with a few things. I think it's clear my point that I try to make here. It's really not just someone else's computer. There is a massive responsibility for you. You are running your business in a compute environment. Run it like a responsible person, right? It's your business. Amazon doesn't care if you lose your data. It's too bad. Oh, it's maybe a loss of compute. Figure out who's at your table doing the conversation. If you don't get your DevOps people involved, stuff's going to happen that you simply won't know about. And this is a scary thing, because finally, what we classically call the Cisco guys, they don't want to give up their control, but they're already losing the battle. If they don't get to a mindset of being in DevOps, or even a more buzzword, DevSecOps, that might be a challenge right there. Finally, remember that we gain so much more, but there's no such thing as a free lunch. So if you get the agility, assume the responsibility. Thank you very much for your time today.
Our next speaker uses her worldwide travel to explore indie music concerts wherever she goes. In 2018, she attended more than 50 gigs, the smallest with 10 people in the audience, while the largest with over 100,000. She has been closely following the cyber threat landscape for more than 20 years, fiercely fighting off cybercrime. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Checkpoint's head of threat prevention, Orli.
Good morning. As you probably know, Checkpoint has one of the most accomplished threat research teams in the world. And in this year's CPX, we wanted to share with you some of their exciting works. So later today, Maya on the stage will share with you some of the exciting, thrilling campaigns that her team was able to uncover and how they worked with law enforcement agencies in order to bring those down. Yaniv and Oded will share with you some stories about remarkable vulnerabilities and exploits that they found in some of the most popular services and products in the world, and how they worked with the respective vendors in order to patch them. And then they came to me and said, Orli, how about if you go on stage and share with this wide audience our predictions for what's to come in the cyber threat landscape in 2019? And I thought to myself, yes, this is wonderful. Why don't I go on stage in front of the biggest audience we've ever had, in front of a camera, and make predictions of a world that essentially prides itself on being unpredictable? So I thought that's probably not a good idea. I'm not inclined to make a fool out of myself, so this is what I'm actually going to do. I'm going to share with you a few of the most notable trends that we've been seeing in the cyberspace world in 2018. I'll examine a little bit how cyber attackers operate, and then with those in front of us, we can extrapolate and make a few predictions of things that we think are likely to occur in 2019. So let me get started. And the way we're going to do it, much like they do in a court of law, is we're going to break the attacks into their three key ingredients: motive, means, and opportunity. And I'll start with the motive. What motivates cyber attackers? And it's not always trivial to tell what is the motivation behind an attack at first sight. So what we actually do is we look at the individual attack and try to assess what is the desired outcome. And the first is certainly not going to be a surprise to anyone. It's going to be money, financial gain for the attacker. The second is also not a big surprise to anyone who's following this field: information, gaining access to information that you wouldn't otherwise have, espionage, whether between countries or between companies for their corporate IP and so forth. The third is one that's actually been with us since the dawn of cyber attacks everywhere, and that is damage. Except we do need to take note of the fact that the damage you could have inflicted 30 years ago is nowhere near the nation-grade weapons that we have today. The kind of damage that you can inflict in 2018 and 2019 is weapons of mass destruction. You can shut down power plants and hospitals and water supplies and so forth. So damage is much more critical these days than it used to be. And the last one is one that's been getting certainly a lot of attention this past year, and got a lot of attention both from the public and the media. And not everyone necessarily consider it to be a cyber attack, but it is in fact a place where we have adopted the digital technology for communication, and somebody is using cyber tools to abuse it. And this is influence. Using things from the cyber world in order to manipulate people's mind. And under this context, we include things like fake news that are automatically generated, and bots that generate traffic in social media, things that are designed to manipulate our mind and make us believe that something is true when in fact it isn't. Of course, while all of these exist, we do need to acknowledge that it is ultimately money and then everything else. So while we don't have any reliable figure to tell us the full value of the cybercrime industry, there are estimates that range from tens of billions of dollars all the way up to well over $1 trillion. What is undeniable are the statistics that we see across our checkpoint gateways. And in those statistics, we see that in every given month, anywhere from 95 to 98% of the attacks that we see in the wild are motivated by money. As for all of the rest of these motives, mostly they're pursued by nation-state actors, and those, as you can imagine, tend to be more stealthy and a lot more selective with their targets, and therefore they are far more rare. Okay, so let's now extrapolate those notions and make a few predictions for what we expect to see in 2019 regarding motive. And the first one is, of course, that money is going to continue to be the driving force behind cyber attacks. Wherever there's money involved, that's the first place where attackers go. There's no doubt about it, and this trend is likely to continue well into the future. The second thing is that we've seen several nations, or we've seen most nations developing their cyber defense expertise, but what we're now seeing is that more and more nations are also entering the cyber offense side. So we expect to see more attacks that are not necessarily motivated by money, perpetrated by those newcomers, nation-state actors. And lastly, with the notable success of these attacks and with the availability of sophisticated, often AI-based tools that can generate seemingly legitimate data, we expect to see more attacks that seek to gain influence, both on the political side, where it's been very popular, but also moving into the commercial side. Okay, so moving on now to cyber attack means. What are some of the tools and the weapons that cyber criminals and cyber attackers use? And I'll start, of course, with the most known tool of all, which is malware. This is a graph that shows the malware breakdown at a high level between the various types that we see over the past 2 years across the checkpoint nodes worldwide. And here's what we can learn from this. We can see that use of banking Trojans is fairly steady. You can see that ransomware that was at its peak in 2017 is on a very steep decline. You can also see that mobile malware is on a continuous uptrend. And lastly, the winner for 2018 malware of choice is definitely cryptojacking. Mining for cryptocurrency at someone else's expense, someone else's electricity, someone else's CPU, somebody else's cooling power, etc. And it really shouldn't come as much of a surprise to us. If you happen to be here well, wherever that was 2 years ago, I stood on this stage and I presented this mock cybercrime magic quadrant, where we showed that cyber criminals are seeking to lower their risk and maximize their revenue potential. And in 2017, we could say that the top spot was earned by ransomware, offering the superior ratio for everyone. Well, in 2018, that has certainly been replaced by cryptojacking. As cryptocurrency valuation rose, so did the revenue potential. And the risk is significantly lower when you eliminate the inherent friction that comes with collecting ransom. So this is why we see cryptojackers as the most popular attack type in 2018. Of course, cryptojackers are not the only type of attack that tries to keep itself very stealthy. In fact, in 2018, one of the most notable trends that we've seen is that most malware, regardless of their type, attempted to keep a low profile. Low profile means that you're not as likely to be caught by the users, by the law enforcement agencies, etc. And it also means that your attack can stay on longer for higher gains. The other thing that we've seen is that malware tended to be a lot more targeted. Attackers didn't just indiscriminately spray their malware everywhere. They chose the victims, the targets that would offer the highest returns. So I mentioned that ransomware was on a somewhat steep decline. But the revenues from ransomware hasn't declined quite as much, if at all. And the reason for that is that most ransomware attacks in 2018 were targeting businesses. And businesses, as the attackers and us learned, are far more likely to pay the ransom fees. And we can also charge them for a significantly higher ransom to begin with. So revenues didn't decline, even though the number of attacks have declined dramatically. Here's one more thing that we've been noticing. Everything is available as a service. Now, you could tell me, okay, there's nothing new about being able to go online and buy a piece of malware, buy an exploit kit. These things have been around for a long time. This is true. But what has changed in 2018 is the volume of these operations and their diversity and their versatility. So it's no longer just those malware and exploit kits. It's now also phishing kits and spam kits and services for denial of service and traffic distribution system and distributed VPNs and so forth and so forth. You can buy individual components or you can buy a full-blown campaign and tailor it to your own needs. And the side effect of this is that more and more people can enter this world of cybercrime and take part of it. The bar has been lowered. People of varying skill set can take part in this rather lucrative world. The last mean I wanted to highlight is one that is actually very interesting, and we call it the software supply chain. This is when attackers poison popular packages and services in order to get the most effective distribution means possible. Things like open source libraries and SDKs and function libraries and Dockers. When you infect the underlying software, you don't need to deal with things like vulnerabilities and exploits, and you don't need to be very evasive to bypass the sandbox. You don't need to do any of those things. You just get delivered into some of the most coveted assets in the world straight with the software package. We've seen that actually in action several times. We've seen it in the NotPetya attack. We've seen it this year with millions of Docker images downloaded from Docker Hub, only to contain cryptojacking software and get installed on servers. Our own team has recently uncovered an SDK of this sort in the mobile world, which we will publish in 2 weeks. So this is a very popular and a very effective means of distribution. Okay, so let's now take a look at some of our predictions based on what I've just shown you for 2019. As long as cryptocurrency valuation remains high, the revenue potential remains high, and we expect cryptojackers to continue to thrive. The number of people taking part in the cybercrime world is expected to continue to grow. This has been a trend for a long time. We don't see any end to it in the near sight. And of course, the side effect to that will be that the number of attacks will also continue to grow, the sheer number of them. And then lastly, we do expect to see more people abusing the powerful distribution power of the software supply chain. In a world where nobody writes code from scratch, there are plenty of opportunities being offered to attackers to include their malware in all sorts of packages that would later get distributed. Okay, moving on to opportunities. And there's certainly no shortage of opportunities in the cyberspace world. In fact, the single most reliable, most consistent trend in this world is that if we build it, they will come. Every time we adopt a new technology into our world, the cyber threats immediately follow us there. And we should have absolutely no illusions about it. Our next set of technologies are also going to be attacked by cyber tools. So you can hear about the opportunities offered in all of these technologies throughout this event. I thought I'd use this time to highlight a few things that are more emerging and sometimes a little bit hyped, and talk a little bit about the opportunities that they offer. And I'll start with IoT. We used to think of IoT devices primarily as soldiers in a bigger army of devices that can attack, create an orchestrated, large-scale distributed attack. But what happens when we introduce those same devices into our networks? The answer is, of course, that we create a new opportunity for attackers, because these devices are very often the weakest link. They're using non-standard or old operating system. They reside often in unsegmented networks right next to the most coveted assets in your and most sensitive assets in your network. And so they offer the attacker the ability to do one of two things: either use them as the entry point into the greater organization, they are after all the weakest link, or as a target in their own right, because they hold some information, or you can cripple their functionality. What do you think will happen when we introduce cryptocurrency into our financial world? So I mentioned before that attackers can make a lot of money through cryptojacking, mining for new cryptocurrency, but there is actually an easier way to make money off of this. You can just steal that money. And it turns out that cryptocurrency is just as vulnerable as real money, if not more so. And already today, we see info stealers that don't just seek for random information. They scrape your memory looking for the specific address of a crypto wallet, and then your your seed phrase and things that would allow them to access this wallet. And we also see some creativity around this world where we see things like new things emerge, like, for example, crypto shuffling. Crypto shuffling is a kind of unique way of stealing cryptocurrency, where the attackers replaces in your clipboard the crypto wallet address, so that later when you paste it into the transaction page, what will happen is that the funds will be transferred to his wallet rather than your own. Everybody's talking about artificial intelligence, right? This is the most hyped technology that's being widely adopted everywhere. But we should be very careful when we adopt new technologies because the cyber threats will follow us there as well. We are now in the process of replacing human beings with machines and asking them to make decisions for us. And what happens is that we create a new opportunity for cyber attackers to attack those algorithms, compromise the way that they make decision in one of two ways. Either compromise the system and the algorithm, or do something that's far worse, and that will be to poison the data through which these systems learn. So let's summarize with a few of these opportunities into 2019. We do expect to see IoT devices becoming more and more the entry point of choice into the wider organization. We expect more popularity and creativity around crypto wallet theft. And then we do expect to see the emergence of attacks that seek to manipulate AI-based algorithms and systems. But I couldn't finish this talk without mentioning the single most important vulnerability and opportunity of them all. So in the CVE database of vulnerabilities and exposures, there is apparently one record that is sorely missing. And it turns out that this is a vulnerability that actually exists in practically every system in the world. It is highly exploitable, and turns out it takes forever to patch. So if this record actually happened to exist, this is probably what it would look like. The human weakness vulnerability, where we trick users into all sorts of unsafe activities. There's a rather famous saying in the cybersecurity world. It was made back in 2010, and it says that given the choice between dancing pigs and security, users will pick the dancing pigs every single time. And the first people to know that, that's the cyber attackers. They know that we're going to click on that link. They know that we're going to submit our credentials to unsafe websites. We will download those applications and we will grant them access to all of those privileged resources on our device. And we will, despite numerous warnings and education, we will actually activate that macro in the Office documents. That's just us human beings. We're really weak. And the truth is that in 2018, 10 years after this was said, the majority of cyber attacks include some form or another of human weakness vulnerability exploit. So, unlike all of those other predictions that I made before, my very last prediction is one that sadly I feel very confident when I make, and that is that in 2019, people are still going to be just as weak as they've ever been. But I really didn't want to finish on this somewhat grim note, telling you all that you're weak. So rather than that, I'm going to finish with a gift to all of you for being here and for listening. Since I know at this point you're all dying to know what a dancing pig looks like, I will now show you a dancing pig. And once you've seen it, the next time you're faced with this dilemma, you don't need to wonder what it looks like, and you can safely pick security.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Eward Driehuis, Chief Research Officer, SecureLink.
Good morning. Toss aside your risk models, because it's 2019, people. I want to take you on a little journey through cyber threats. And I want to take you from the perspective of data. We collect that data while protecting our customers at SecureLink, over 1,300 of them. We collect over 10 trillion data points per year from deep within the hearts of within their perimeters in order to see what's really, really affecting them. And from that, we learn stuff. And my job is to actually show you what we've learned. And we've learned 3 distinct things to be happening in 2018, and I think they're all relevant for you. But before we go there, I think it's always super important to explain to you why we're here. Granted, this is because I worked in this space for a long time, and I might be a little bit fixated on those humble beginnings of cybercrime, but there we go. It started all back in 2005, 2006, with these nice people in the first circle. Granted, the lady that you see is innocent, okay? It's just the 3 guys there. They built an ecosystem of cybercrime, and they did it because their friends were doing stuff like brick and mortar crime, human trafficking, arms dealing, drugs and prostitution. And these guys were programmers, and they thought, hey, what if we build a user experience for our friends so they can rob Western banks? So they went ahead and did likewise. They sold it to them, and the cybercrime ecosystem started. They made a lot of money, and the banks, they were in the middle of digital transformation. They were moving to online channels, so they reimbursed every single fraud that was done to us, no matter how stupid we were, even if we gave our passwords to people with Russian accents over the phone. So everything was A-okay for the longest time. That changed in 2013, when one of these guys decided, hey, listen, I want to rob everyone. And he created something called CryptoLocker. And ransomware took over the world. Now, they never made quite as much money as with the original fraud, but the risk was now everyone's. Then, fast forward 4 more years, 2 new big attacks. Everyone's been talking about these. I'm officially not allowed to mention them again, but hey-ho. These attacks, what most people missed, was that for WannaCry, not petty, for every single victim out there that ever paid the ransom, not one single one got their files back. So we were thinking, are these the worst criminals ever? Don't they know that if you give the people the files back, they will say stuff like, hey, you really can't trust these criminals. That's not what you want, that's bad press. So we thought, okay, there must be some different motivation. Nation-state threats, destruction. And that brings us to 2019. And that's the short history of cyber threats. Thank you. But most of our risk models were created in that new paradigm of ransomware in 2013. And this is the risk model. There's always going to be bad stuff. It's going to fluctuate over time like waves in the sea. We just track it and extrapolate so we know what's going to happen in the future. Right. My argument is that that might not cut it today anymore, ladies and gentlemen. And this is the reason why. From those 10 trillion data points, 250,000 times, the AI said to us, hey, listen up, human, you need to take a look at this. And we did. And from that, we saw over 21,000 times when some really shady stuff was going on. And in diving into those numbers, we found those 3 trends. And I'm going to go ahead and say something that might sound a little bit contradictory, but bear in mind, we look at the inside of the net. We look at what's affecting customers. We're not looking at what bounces off of firewalls necessarily. And here's what. Yes, of course, cryptojacking was a compelling proposition for the criminals, because did you know that ransomware was actually a lot of work? As a criminal, You need for every single infected machine, you need to store a unique identifier. Then, when the victim pays up, you need to match that to the appropriate private key, bundle it with a tool, send it off to the victim, and do that 10,000 times and do it very fast. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. So, of course, when cryptocurrency value soared, they thought, we can make cryptocurrency in a better way. Enter mining. They just need to leverage our CPU power, and we're right on it. But in the middle of the year, we saw those numbers plummeting. And it actually, and this is a contradiction, we saw it within the network, so affecting our customers pretty much going down to zero. Yes, we did see the all-specific group actually diving into some database farms because they are high on CPU power and putting some stuff there, but that's just about it. And ransomware soared back up. And that's just what, and of course, that correlates very nicely with Bitcoin value. Because in January, a Bitcoin was $20,000. And in December, it was about 3. Now, if there's one thing you know about criminals, they're not in the business of making less money for the same effort. So I think that takes away some of the compelling from the proposition. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I grew up on a small island in the Netherlands. This is a local Dutch treat. It's a herring. We eat raw fish with raw onions, I know. We also brush our teeth a lot. But my mother, she taught me an important lesson. And this is the lesson. Don't feed the seagulls. Because if you do, they will get cockier and cockier. They will be back with all their friends and family, and they will crap on your shoulders. So we don't feed the seagulls, and then the problem goes away. But then there's the tourists on my island, and they feed the seagulls, and they get cockier and cockier. So what if, can't we mitigate this ransomware problem, all of us here in the room, by stopping to pay the criminals? Let's just not do it anymore. Can we agree on that? Well, if only life were that easy. Because criminals found a way to circumvent our principles. And that's one of the most scary trends we see. The first one, rookie criminals going after the crypto, in whichever way they can. But it won't keep you awake at night. This is what might keep you awake at night. Cybercrime evolved. These guys, they enter your network in which way. You know that if they want 10,000 infections, they just send a spam run of 1 million, and they just get in. If they need more, they get more. Then they quietly look for value. They're going to find that value and steal that value if they can. One example that was very creative, I would say artisanal almost, was when we saw criminals looking for a very specific file on a customer's network. It was the invoice template. And in that invoice template, they edited one little field. Can you guess what it is? Yes, it was the bank account number. And they retreated. And then they just watched the money rolling in the next month. But more often than not, they will not find that particular value. And then they get grumpy and go to plan B, destroying online backups and then ransoming the network for an enterprise ransom. And that's when you have a choice between bankrupting your company by doing nothing because you have no means of recovery. There's many organizations out there only have an online backup, no offline backup. So if you don't have an offline backup, how are you going to recover if all your online backups have been destroyed? And then extort an enterprise. So this is where your principles kick in. And this is where we start to feed the seagulls. Because many insurers and incident response teams out there, they just carry a big bucket of Bitcoin to an event. And their first action is to start feeding the seagulls. And then look how to recover as swiftly as possible. Now this is an ethical discussion, people. I don't know what to think about that, but I also understand as a business leader, you just don't want to bankrupt your company. And then obviously, the nation states. We've talked about these people so many times. I've plotted all the APTs that are by now known in this little chart. There's about, let's say, 20-something of them. 2 of them are in Russia, 2 of them are in Iran, 2 in North Korea, 1 in Vietnam, and the rest of them are in China. So these are hacking groups connected to nation states, sponsored by nation states, that are suspected to do that. And talking about motivation, I think that's actually a good idea. And these are the 3 motivations that are relevant for you nowadays. The first one is sowing destruction. This is about rolling the muscles. When NotPetya struck and investigators found that there were ties with Russia, did Russia deny it? They just shrugged their shoulders and so, yes, so what? You know, this is what happens if a conflict in geopolitics between 2 nations is asymmetric. The US is so much richer than Russia. Another word for asymmetric warfare is terrorism. So this is when the attack types start to have similarities with terrorism. It's as if they want you to know it's them. There's one country that's even poorer. One country that's even poorer. So they don't mind when flexing their muscles a little bit to actually make a little bit of money on the side. And for the longest time, they were thought to be behind all the big breaches in the SWIFT network, the interbanking network. Of course, we're talking about North Korea. But they are so poor, like their GDP is like the GDP of an average Austrian city. It's that small. So they don't mind making a little bit of money on the side. And their sweet spot is indeed crypto stealing. So all the exchange heists, you know, the vast majority of crypto gets stolen directly off of exchange, who act like full-fledged banks, but they're only 15 years less experienced in protecting themselves. They steal it directly off of them, and it's estimated half of that is attributable to North Korea, filling budget gaps. Second motivation. And the last motivation, well, the gentleman spies. These are the people that when they enter your network don't destroy anything. You know, the Chinese espionage groups, and we've observed these as well, they don't enter their targets' networks directly. They will go through the supply chain. They will hack your IT service provider, for example, and then do lateral movement from there into their targets. And from that target, do lateral movement from that PC into where the actual secrets are. And this is the scary stuff, because they have the capacity to bypass 1, 2, sometimes 3 layers of detection. Will bypass the firewall, will bypass email security, and it might bypass endpoint security if they specifically purposed their malware to do this one thing. And then you need to be there when they start doing lateral movement. So this is complicated stuff. So 3 motivations, all relevant. Now, the question I get most, and I think it's super relevant, is people say to me, yeah, nice story, bruh. I like the part about the seagulls. But how are APTs interested in me? I'm not interesting. I'm saying to, well, you're probably not. You know, neither am I. But that's not really the issue, is it? You know, the reason why you're targeted nowadays, not necessarily because you are a target, you might be in someone's supply chain. Do you supply to someone big? Do you have other people in your supply chain? Or might you be collateral damage, like in the NotPetya attack, like with those rolling the muscle attacks. They were going after Ukraine, and they hit an enormous amount of companies like Maersk. Of course you might be lucky. And as a matter of fact, you're very likely to be lucky in this room. So the 2019 risk model, listen, I'm not saying that everything's going to get worse and worse and worse. It's not that. People have been warning us for years that the world's going to end, and we're still here, aren't we? That's not, it's changed. We have stuff that's going to happen a lot. Ransomware, maybe if crypto value will go up, maybe we'll have crypto jacking again impacting us. Right now it isn't. Right? So that's everyone in this room, every single person is going to deal with one of those attacks, but you're not going to care, you're not going to lose any sleep over it probably. The second type of attack is when your organization get one of those bespoke attacks and maybe those destructive backup attacks, right? And when that happens, I can assure you your board will keep you awake over the weekend. Now that's going to happen to a bunch of you in this room. And then, obviously, we have the nation-state attack. You know, our numbers show us it's going to happen to one of you in this room. You know, and that's what we've seen over the last year. And so we need to think about how to deal with that. We need our endpoints not only to prevent threats, but also be a sensor and to analyze the stuff that's happening there. Detection, we need to check our responses to train incidents and all that stuff. And then maybe just think about accepting risk. You know, we almost never talk about accepting risk or transferring risk, but there's cyber insurance and it gets more, you know, it gets more mature. So from our numbers, what we're seeing, risk is different. You need to toss the 2013 malware models aside. You're dealing with these things by building layers, detection and response, and you need to start to think about accepting. One person told me about submarine security. Now this is a little bit of a bleak picture that I don't like, but he said, listen, if one part of the submarine gets breached, you just close the hatch, you close off the entire compartment. Johnson banging on the door, sorry Johnson, but you need to sacrifice yourself in order to save the rest of us. You know, another maybe a little bit more positive approach might be the lizard. His tail gets attacked, he sheds the tail, grows a new one. Maybe that's one of the things we should start thinking about, going back to basics. Thank you.
Our next speaker spent 10 years in Israeli military intelligence, and she has a master's degree in cancer research. She enjoys drinking whiskey and eating cookies while she reads Harry Potter for the 5th time. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Checkpoint's Director of